September 1944, Eastern France. A chill mist rolls across the fields near the quiet village of Arracourt. Hidden somewhere in that fog, Panzer Ace Hauptmann Ernst Barkmann commands his Panther tank, a machine that, until that morning, was considered untouchable. A steel fortress whose frontal armor no known American weapon could pierce. To Barkmann and his crew, the American Shermans were not opponents. They were targets. The Germans called them Tommy Cookers. The Americans themselves, with gallows humor, nicknamed them Ronsons, because they lit the first time every time. The joke was cruel but true. From Normandy to Lorraine, the Sherman's thin armor had burned thousands of crews alive. The Panther, with its 80mm sloped frontal armor and long-barreled 75mm cannon, could kill a Sherman before the Americans could even get close enough to fire back. In the eyes of Barkmann's crew, this coming battle was a formality, a routine hunt. But that morning in the fog of Arracourt, something shattered the myth of German invincibility. At dawn, Barkmann spotted movement in the haze, silhouettes of Shermans emerging through the mist. He smiled grimly and ordered the gunner to engage. The thunder of the 75mm TWK-42 cannon tore through the silence. A Sherman exploded in a fireball. The crew laughed. Same result, as always. Then, a flash, a single, unnatural flash, cut through the mist like lightning. Before Barkmann could react, a deafening crack tore through the air. His Panther lurched. An armor-piercing round had punched straight through his frontal plate. Inside, sparks ignited fumes. Flames engulfed the cabin. Barkmann crawled from the burning wreckage, coughing, his mind spinning with a single question. What in God's name was that shell? To understand what happened that morning, we must step back to the crisis of American armor in 1944. A crisis that cost thousands of lives and demanded a solution not of brute force, but of science. The M4 Sherman, reliable, fast, and easy to mass-produce, had one fatal flaw. It was outclassed. The Panther's armor wasn't just thicker, it was smarter. Its angled design meant that incoming shells often ricocheted harmlessly away. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate it, even at point-blank range. Against German heavy tanks, American crews were forced to fight with tactics, not firepower. A grim statistic defined their reality. For every Panther destroyed, 4 or 5 Shermans were lost. General Dwight Eisenhower, furious and frustrated, wrote to the War Department demanding answers. Our men are dying in vehicles inferior to their enemies. Find a way to kill the Panther, or we will pay in blood. Engineers responded by introducing a new 76mm gun, a longer, higher-velocity weapon for upgraded Shermans. But even this wasn't enough. Tests showed it could barely dent the Panther's front armor beyond 500 yards. In battle, that meant death. American tankers joked bitterly that their only chance was to hit the German from behind if they lived long enough to get there. The problem wasn't courage. It was physics. The Panther could take hits the Sherman simply couldn't deliver. So the Americans turned to a different kind of weapon. Not a gun, not a tank, but chemistry. In 1943, deep inside the research labs at Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Frankfurt Arsenal, metallurgists began experimenting with something extraordinary: tungsten carbide. A metal harder than steel, almost as dense as gold, and nearly as indestructible as diamond. Its melting point, over 3,400 degrees Celsius. Its density, so high it could punch through armor where ordinary shells would shatter. The concept was simple but revolutionary. Instead of trying to outgun the Germans, the Americans would out-engineer them. A team of scientists created a new subcaliber round, a small, dense tungsten core wrapped in a lightweight aluminum jacket. When fired, the lighter casing allowed far higher velocity. The core, incredibly hard and dense, concentrated all that kinetic energy into a tiny point. It didn't blast its way through armor, it sliced through it. The result was the M93 high-velocity armor-piercing HVAP round. At Aberdeen, the first tests stunned observers.
Fired from a 76mm gun, the M93 HVAP screamed from the barrel at over 1,030 meters per second, 30% faster than standard shells. At 1,000 yards, it could pierce 160 millimeters of solid armor, more than enough to go clean through a Panther's sloped frontal plate. For the first time, American crews had a weapon that could meet and beat German tanks head-on. But there was a problem. Tungsten wasn't just rare. It was strategically precious. The U.S. had limited deposits. Most came from China and Portugal, both difficult to access during wartime. And tungsten was vital for other critical industries: cutting tools, aircraft engines, and precision machining. Washington faced a painful choice: use tungsten for guns or for the factories that made them.
In the end, the decision was pragmatic. Tungsten would go primarily to machine tools to keep the arsenal of democracy running. Tank crews would get what little was left. By late 1944, less than 5% of all 76mm ammunition was HVAP. Most tankers received 3 or 4 rounds per tank, if they were lucky. Orders were clear: use HVAP only against heavy German armor, Panthers and Tigers, nothing else. Those few rounds became as precious as gold, and for some, they would decide the outcome of entire battles. In September 1944, near the French village of Arracourt, the moment arrived. The German 5th Panzer Army, desperate to halt General Patton's advance, launched a massive counterattack. Over 200 tanks, including the feared 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. Facing them were the men of the 4th Armored Division, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a man whose name would later grace the legendary M1 Abrams tank. His 37th Tank Battalion had something the Germans didn't know existed: a small supply of M93 HVAP rounds. Abrams, a calm and calculating commander, gathered his men and said simply, "Save the special rounds for Panthers, make every shot count." And then the fog rolled in. The battlefield disappeared into a pale gray void. Engines rumbled unseen. Every sound, the clank of tracks, the whine of turrets, echoed like ghosts. In that blindness, veteran German tankers advanced confidently, sure they would crush the outmatched Shermans, but they were walking into a trap of their own making. The ramp of the landing craft dropped with a metallic crash, and chaos immediately swallowed the men inside. Water churned red with blood. Machine gun bullets tore through flesh and steel alike. Waverly Woodson Jr., already wounded from the shell that hit their vessel moments earlier, was thrown to the deck, his body screaming in agony. But even as blood poured from his side, his first thought wasn't of himself. It was of the men crying out for help. He pushed himself up, clutching his medical kit, and stepped into the inferno. Each step through the cold surf was a battle against both the pain in his body and the enemy's relentless fire. Yet, in that madness, he found purpose. A wounded soldier screamed nearby. Woodson reached him first,
pressing his hand to the wound, calling for others to drag the man higher up the beach. Then another soldier and another. For the next 30 hours, he would treat hundreds. The chaos of Omaha Beach was beyond comprehension. Men staggered through explosions, medics fell as they tried to help others, and bodies floated in with the tide. But Woodson worked tirelessly, transforming a patch of hellish sand into a makeshift aid station. With bullets whizzing overhead, he set broken limbs, applied morphine, and bandaged gaping wounds. At one point, he even performed an emergency amputation with nothing but a field knife and raw courage. And still, he pressed on. When a man began to drown in the surf, Woodson dropped everything and rushed into the waves, dragging him to shore. His strength, his endurance defied the limits of the human body. He fought his own pain for every heartbeat, refusing to collapse even as exhaustion blurred his vision. Hours became a day. The tide receded. The cries of the dying began to fade into the haunting silence of the aftermath. And when his body finally gave out, when his blood loss became too great, fellow medics had to drag him away from his post. When doctors finally tended to him, they ordered him to rest. But even then, his words were simple. "I need to get back to my unit." That sentence captured the essence of Waverly Woodson, not a man chasing medals, but one bound by duty, compassion, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The men he saved, white and black, officers and privates, Americans and allies, many would never know the identity of the medic who had saved them. They never knew he was a black soldier serving in a segregated unit. They never knew that he himself had been bleeding the entire time he saved them. And maybe that's how Woodson wanted it. Because in that moment, on that beach, there were no races, no divisions, no rank. There was only humanity and the will to save it. He never sought fame, never demanded justice, never asked for recognition. His actions were enough. But history, as it often does, failed him. For decades, his story was buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, oversight, and racial prejudice. The Medal of Honor that should have been his was lost in a maze of paperwork and political hesitation. Others were decorated, paraded, remembered. But Woodson's name faded quietly into the margins. His wife, Joanne, refused to let that stand. For decades, she fought for recognition, reaching out to congressmen, historians, and journalists, refusing to allow her husband's sacrifice to be forgotten. She is now in her late 90s, but her fight continues. Senator Chris Van Hollen has taken up the cause, leading the push to finally award Woodson the Medal of Honor he earned so many years ago. The First Army supports the motion. Military historians dig through archives, searching for the lost documents that prove his nomination once existed. But every time they get close, red tape reappears. Still, the effort endures, because it's about more than a medal. It's about justice. It's about correcting the record, so future generations will know that the story of D-Day was not just one of white heroism, but of American heroism, shared by all who fought and bled there. It's about honoring the 2,000 black soldiers who landed on those beaches and fought under the same fire, the same fear, the same courage. Woodson's story stands as a testament that bravery knows no color, that courage is measured not by medals, but by sacrifice. He saved over 200 men in a single day. He stopped bleeding long enough to save others who were bleeding. He went beyond the limits of flesh and fear to fulfill his duty as a healer. And when it was all over, he asked for nothing. No spotlight, no parades, no speeches,
just silence, and the satisfaction of knowing he had done what was right. Today, as the fight for his Medal of Honor continues, his legacy has already transcended the medal itself, because every soldier saved by Waverly Woodson carried a piece of his courage home. Every life he touched became proof that in humanity's darkest hours, compassion still burns brightest. He was a healer, a helper, a hero. The Distinguished Service Cross remains the only official recognition of his valor, but the truth is clear. Waverly Bernard Woodson, Jr. didn't need a medal to be a hero. He already was one. And as Senator Van Hollen once said, "It is never too late to say thank you. It is never too late to right a historic wrong."
If this story moved you, if it reminded you that true heroism
Lives in quiet courage and selfless acts, then make sure to subscribe and stay with us for more powerful, untold stories of World War II. Watch our next documentary on screen now, another forgotten chapter of history brought to light. Subscribe for more value-driven, cinematic World War II stories every week.